What's up, everyone? Happy Lunar New Year. I hope this Year of the Ox is a fruitful and healthy year for you all. Alright, let's get right into it. Over on the Mushin Martial Culture YouTube channel, I have recently released a new episode of Kung Fu Explained, and it is the third episode of the Shaolin Legacy series. This episode continues in the temple's timeline, covering the Tang Dynasty. If you are interested in the Shaolin Temple's history, head on over and check it out. If you are new to the series, it is advisable to start with the first episode. I have also been releasing the footage from the historic Bagua Zhang gathering that took place in Beijing in 1993. As with all the episodes, I have added relevant background information on each performer and subtitled the commentary from Professor Kanggu Wu. Episode 7 has been released, and there is one more episode to go. I have also recently set up a dedicated Mushin Martial Culture Facebook page. I will post any releases, both video and podcast, to the page, so it'll be easy if you follow the page to be kept up to date with any releases I make. Also, you can interact and discuss the various posts on the page itself. From time to time, other interesting posts will be made regarding the martial arts and their cultures. So head on over and follow the page. Just search for Mushin Martial Culture on Facebook. As always, if you want to support the Drunken Boxing podcast and Mushin Martial Culture in general, you can do so through our Patreon page. Your support helps me to continue making quality content regarding the martial arts and their surrounding culture. Any and all support is highly appreciated. Patreon supporters also have added benefits, and there are 3 tiers currently, with the third tier being the Huajin online learning platform. Through this platform, one has the opportunity to learn the deeper aspects of Xingyi Quan and Bagua Zhang in a systematic and complete manner, irrespective of your geographic location. The course is available now for your enrollment through the Mushin Martial Culture Patreon site, under the Huajin tier. You may find my Patreon site at patreon.com/Mushin Martial Culture. All one word. Alright, moving on. If you recall my guests from episode 3 of this podcast, namely Mark Mastrandrea and Simon Lockett, they have set up a YouTube channel focusing on Sichuanese cooking. Simon is a professionally trained Sichuan cook, and Mark is a Chinese medical practitioner. And their channel not only provides recipes and instruction on the preparation of great Chinese dishes, but also the medical theory behind the ingredients used. Go on over to their YouTube channel by searching for Wok Drop on YouTube. That's WOK space DROP, Wok Drop. Also, my guest from episode 12, who was Will Wayne Williams, who runs the excellent Monkey Steals Peach channel, he will be releasing his documentary on the martial arts of Fujian province soon. So keep an eye out for that one. His YouTube channel is once again Monkey Steals Peach. And now the moment you have all been waiting for, today's episode. My guest today is Tom Bisio. Tom Bisio is a well-known Chinese medical practitioner and martial artist hailing from New York. I recall buying his book, A Tooth from the Tiger's Mouth, back in 2004 when it was first published, and it was an excellent resource for injury treatment, particularly for Chinese martial artists, and it helped me immensely over the years. Tom Bisio ran a well-known acupuncture clinic in New York from 1990 to 2015. He has an extensive background in martial arts practice, starting in his teens, in the Filipino martial arts. In the 80s, he started studying both Chinese medicine and martial arts under Vince Black, and he then went on to train under numerous renowned teachers of Xingyi Quan, Bagua Zhang, and Taiji Quan over the course of many trips to China and Southeast Asia. He was one of the early American practitioners to come to Beijing and study the arts here. Interestingly, he has also studied directly with my own martial family throughout the years and recently translated Zhao Dayuan's China books into English, which are highly recommended. He has authored numerous books on the martial arts and Chinese medicine, and in the show notes I have placed links to some of his works. He currently runs New York Internal Arts and Internal Arts International with a goal of propagating the Chinese martial arts to a larger audience. The links to his website are also in the show notes. This was a great discussion, and it was very interesting to hear about his studies and path over many years, studying with people such as the late Vince Black and others. I'm sure you'll find this discussion as enjoyable and interesting as I did. So, without further ado, I bring you Tom Bisio. Okay, welcome to the Drunken Boxing Podcast, Mr. Bisio. I'm extremely happy and honored that we finally have a chance to do this. You're somebody that I've followed and I've known about for many years. Even got quite a few of your wonderful books that you've written, and all your other projects that you've released out there. So I'm very happy and welcome.
Well, thank you. It's great to be on the program. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, pleasure's all mine.
And words about my books.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I remember, I think your first book that I got was A Tooth from the Tiger's Mouth, and I think it had just been published like many,
2004.
yeah.
Around 2004. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I actually had a knee injury in 2003 that was pretty severe, and that was part of the reason I actually came across your book was because I was looking up some materials that I could use in terms of physical therapy for myself, and your book came across, and I bought it, and it's still one of my books that I've used throughout my sporting and physical activity career, etc., as we'd say, as a really good handbook for general rehabilitation, injury, and just general health. It's a very good book. So,
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm glad people, because that was the whole point, right? That book was to make it accessible to people, stuff that we don't even learn in Chinese medicine school, at least in the U.S. It's mostly like martial arts tradition, bone setting tradition that those formulas and methods come out. And so I think of all the books I've done, that's probably the one I'm the most pleased with because it's affected the most people in a positive way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, a few people that listen to this podcast will know who you are. People that are involved in Xingyi Quan, Bagua, Zhang, and other internal classified arts will know who you are. But for the other people that aren't too familiar with you and your background, could you give us a brief, well, it doesn't have to be brief, but a background introduction to yourself, etc.?
Okay, I'll try and keep it brief.
It doesn't have to be brief. This podcast is never brief, so.
I noticed that actually.
Yeah.
I started martial arts when I was 15, probably like a lot of people at that, because that was that was the early, that was the 60s or late 60s, early 70s. So basically with Taekwondo at the local YMCA with a Korean teacher there who taught boxing, wrestling, and Taekwondo. And that got me very intrigued. I mean, I had done some wrestling, just a little bit, like a year of wrestling. So that got me intrigued in the whole idea of Asian martial arts. And I later went on to study near the town I lived in New Jersey, where I grew up, Ishin Kempo Karate, which is really Inu with some elements added. Okay. And I did that at black belt, which is like, so I was about 17 then. Then I went to college in New York, so I started meeting other martial arts people and kind of playing around in the Columbia University gym with different people. And there were some different people who taught there, like Tom Bisio, who was a Tiger Claw teacher and later went on to become a PKA champion.
No relation to you, though, right?
No relation.
Oh, okay.
Video, but he is Italian American, but and he was an interesting guy. I didn't really train with him, but we talked a few times. And then from there, I had it was the Bruce Lee craze a little bit still, and which also was part of, I guess, my formative years as a young, as like 16, 17. I'd read about Dan Inosanto and Filipino martial arts, and that sounded really, really interesting. So I was looking around for a while, and then I noticed there was this Advanced Arnis Institute on Fifth Avenue, which I thought, like, at a fairly fancy address. I thought, there's really a martial arts school on Fifth Avenue? And I went, and it turned out the Philippine consulate, and they said, oh, yeah, on Sundays, this crazy guy shows up and teaches on the pelota court on the roof. So I back, and all these rough-looking guys with sticks and blades were there, and that was the start of training with Leo Gahi in Bikita Tercia, Filipino martial arts, which I did for quite a long time, overlapping other studies like in Kaji Kembo, Xingyi. And I mean, Leo Gai's still teaching in the Philippines. I still know people that train with him, but when I got it, I think Filipino martial arts training with Gahi, going to the Philippines to fight in 1979 and meeting Filemon Cañete and training with two really high-level people started to make me see that it wasn't so much techniques, but these principles that they had in their body. And of course, I'd read Robert Smith's books, so I was very interested in the pictures in those books. There was something captivating about the way Wang Shujin moved, even in the still photos. And, that seemed like Filipino arts, but not. And this idea, I guess that there was this idea about energy and internal connection, right, which were certainly manifested by Cañete, all the Cañetes, and also by Leo Gahi at a very high level, but they didn't really have the way the Chinese martial arts have this language to talk about it.
Okay.
Just say, oh, his body mechanics aren't good, or more body mechanics, or more like this.
Right.
And kind of move the Dantian, but you're more like, what do you mean exactly?
It's like telling somebody to do it better, but not telling them how to do it better. Yeah.
And the like this is something they're actually kind of doing internally from a Chinese martial arts perspective, I would say. So when I think at one of the Leo Gahi's training camps, I was one of the assistant teachers, and most of the people who came, it was instructor training, were already very proficient in other martial arts. So there was nobody there not trained for years in martial arts. So it was quite a group of people, and Dan Insano was there with some of his top guys. So I got to see some of what he taught, and Fred Dagerberg, who was a very savvy boxer, martial artist from Chicago, used to bounce rock concerts in the 60s, so a lot of practical skills. Yeah. They were all there, and I got to interact with them. And at the very end, someone said, "Oh, I met this guy. He does Chinese stuff." And I was like, what does he do? And they said, Xingyi. And I was like, Xingyi? You met somebody who does Xingyi? So the last night I spent meeting Vince Black, who had been there the whole time. He kind of quietly stood on the side most of the time and observed a lot. I had seen him setting people's bones and stuff during the seminar and fixing a couple people. And then basically he talked to me about Xingyi and the principles, and I spent the night being thrown around this hotel room over the bed. Sometimes while he's eating chicken with one hand. That I was like, okay, I need to study this, and I think I knew I was going to be in LA, so I did a little bit with him when I was visiting one of my students there. Eric Knaus, who later went on to found this Dog Brothers group.
Wow.
So I trained with Vince a little bit then, and then I went to train with Momoy Cañete, Filemon Cañete in the Philippines, and on the way out, I stopped for 2 weeks at his school, and started to train Xingyi more seriously. So from then on, when I looked at Filemon Cañete and people like Leo Gahi, I was starting to look at it with this Xingyi eye, like, what are they doing? What is it? Like, how are they moving their feet? How are they using the dantian and the yao to generate power?
Right.
And you could start those connections.
So you'd been given a bit of insight into the key components of body function, and then you started using that understanding to evaluate other physical activities like the Filipino martial arts.
Yeah, and now I can't evaluate any activity without that, so I don't know if that's good.
No, that's good. I think it's good. I think there's a lot of value to the breaking down and the understanding that these arts have of the human body and how it moves and functions, particularly within martial arts, but I mean that can be extrapolated onto other physical activities, and I think that's good because it helps us to understand things better and refine them.
I think a lot of the modern fascial research, I wrote a few articles on it, but as I look at it, it's just, they're really talking about what the Chinese internal arts have been talking about for centuries, about this tendency, I want to call it that, right?
Right.
So let's see, when I first did Xingyi, I didn't. Vince had said, don't show anybody what you're doing, not because to be secretive, but he said you won't be good at it and you'll lose confidence in it because a lot of guys who are good at martial arts,
right?
And and it's just going to make you lose confidence. So I noticed I didn't show anybody Xingyi or even mention it much in the beginning, but people started when we did the close-in drills in Paquita Terrace, they started going, wait a minute, like you're doing something different. And I was like, what do you mean? Same thing. And I think it was because, more rooting, more power with less effort.
Right.
And instead of being good I was crappy at Xingyi at that time, but those body skills transferred into the thing I was good at.
Right.
Very quickly. And then over time, of course, my Xingyi got better, and then I started teaching it, and I could more and more articulate the similarities between Filipino martial arts and the internal arts. So it did kind of ruin me for teaching external arts.
Right. I was going to ask you though. I mean, so you're primarily at that point when you had started Xingyi, I mean, you had quite an extensive background in various martial arts, but would you say that the one that you were most heavily vested in was Filipino martial arts at that point?
Yeah, most of my students did that.
Right.
And, a lot of them, and when I got better at Xingyi, they were just like, oh, Xingyi, it's not exciting in the same way that swinging sticks and whacking them is,
Yeah.
It's not, you don't get that immediate feedback and like, oh, I'm doing something, You're standing and so I'm breathing.
But that's really interesting advice that Vince Black told you, that don't show anybody, not because there's something wrong with it, but because you haven't developed it yourself yet. And I find that that's one of the hardest things to convey to people that are coming into Xingyi and Bagua, that it's not going to be overnight, hi, here's some techniques and let's get directly into application, because yes, sure, you're going to understand application principles and whatever, but you got to have to at least develop some body method first before we even start getting distracted by all of that, because it is a distraction at that point if you haven't even got the basic body mechanics and movements to a decent level first.
Yeah, and if your friends are people that are skilled, or even if they've just boxed or wrestled, I shouldn't say just, even if they box or wrestle and they don't do martial arts, if they go, well, let me see something, they're not going to be impressed, and they're going to shut you down, and you're going to feel like, oh, this stuff doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work for you yet.
Yeah.
But it will if you put time in. So it was great advice, and I sometimes give it to students who are in similar situation to me, where they, especially if they haven't done any martial arts, because they obviously, if your Xingyi's not working because you just started 6 months ago, you could switch back to whatever you were good at before.
Yeah.
But if you haven't done any martial arts and you start spouting off about how I'm doing this, internal martial art, you might be embarrassed publicly and lose confidence in it. So I thought it was great advice.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It really is, and it's very hard in today's day and age. I think it's not new, this problem, but it's even worse today because of the availability and the advent of combat sports being in the public eye so prominently today, and that I mean, you cannot take away from the efficacy of MMA systems in terms of getting people to be somewhat combat proficient quickly. So it's something hard for people to now, contrast these two things and still see the value in one or the other, because for them value is based on instant results.
Instant, yes.
So
and that is, it is a difficulty in the current culture with this polarization of, the sort of combatives, as people like to call them. That's not just the MMA stuff, but the the street readiness as though you're a paramilitary kind of guy versus things like martial arts. That's a subject. That's a big subject in and of itself. But
Yeah.
I mean, so I studied with Vince, just to finish my background. I studied with Vince for quite a long time, taught Xingyi and Filipino martial arts at the same time, started to learn some of the Bagua that he knew. And in the early days, he hadn't been to China, so he knew, we basically learned Zhang Zhao's famous form that everybody knows, which I believe is Bagua Lianwan for Zhang Zhao's style, but I could be wrong about that. And Vince could execute that quite well and apply every move. But it was at somewhere in that time he had gone to China and met Ming, and so we started at that point to learn Liang style Bagua Zhang. But he also had taught what he always referred to as old style Kempo, mysteriously. And then when I was visiting his school in San Diego, I watched the Kembo class, and actually it was Kembo. So then at that point he started calling it what its name was, which was Kembo.
Okay.
Lineage of Adriano Emperado. And I watched the class, and it was kind of frightening, which is what made me do it. Watching guys jumping up in the air and throwing medicine balls on people's stomachs who were laying on the ground.
Jesus.
And full contact. Full contact in the sense that you would execute, somebody would punch and you'd execute a series of techniques, but anything in the middle level, you'd hit him on the belt, which you put at navel level, full out.
Oh,
yeah. EI it out. And so I did that until I could teach it. And so basically black belt level, I guess.
Right.
And at that, Vince had connected with Adriano Emperado, so we did the people in San Diego did a lot more with him than I did. I brought him out to New York, and we did a week of classes with him. So I got some of his brand of his personal kind of expression of Kembo.
Okay.
But Kembo, probably in one way, it slowed down my progress in Xingyi because you're going back to this external power and aggression. But in another way, it was useful because it gave me this kind of the whole part of Kembo is the mental attitude of just, I get hit in the face, I keep going until I put you on the ground and finish you, kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And I've actually, you get hit full in the face and you still execute the sequence. Later, you're rubbing your nose and hoping it's not broken, but but in the moment you fall through, which is something I also had gotten in Filipino martial arts, but this was much more down and dirty in a sense, and a lot of how to finish people on the ground once you've thrown them, how to keep them there. Some of which I later realized. I thought it was like, oh, see, a street fighter is going to ball up like this, and so you spread them open with your elbows. Only when the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu came out in public did I realize that, well, these guys who created Kembo, part of the system was Okazaki's Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, okay.
And they put things in there against the guard and against someone who's going to try and pull you into the guard.
Oh, very interesting.
And that's what those techniques were about. But of course, I had no idea of that because I didn't know anything about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time.
Right.
So that was helpful. But at a certain point, I dropped it because I realized my Xingyi wouldn't get better with that if I kept doing Kembo. And it was very hard to get students because it was so brutal. I mean, people come in and look at a class and they'd go like, yeah, really impressive, and you'd never see them again.
And you're like, sign your kids up here. Sign them up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must have been tough.
You're only Kembo and then stick and dagger fighting, you're only going to get a certain crowd of people.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So eventually I realized I really wanted to do internal arts, and that it was actually hard for me to teach external arts because I wasn't really interested in the technique so much as the internal body.
I get it.
And so I know in Filipino arts, and I'm starting to talk about internal body things, and people are looking at me strangely, like, can we just whack sticks together? So I decided to move more to just, okay, I'm just going to teach Xingyi. And then later, I when I was downtown teaching in Tribeca, I had a loft and clinic there in the day. And we'd move the tables out. I had like a Chinese-style open clinic. At night, we'd move all the stuff out of the way and have the Xingyi classes.
Was that is that the place you were at when you published the A Tooth from the Tiger's Mouth?
I was there.
Yeah, because I recall. I think there's a photo in there of this clinic, if I remember correctly. I can't.
Not in the. I don't remember. I'd have to look at maybe the photo, the author photo or something.
Maybe, and I think you talk about it there, or there's reference to something of your clinic in Tribeca. I think so.
My stories or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I had later had a clinic on Fifth Street, but in the East Village. But there was no martial arts there. It was too small for that. So that was kind of the year to bring Vince Black in. And through Vince, we ended up bringing in Lianka Chen and Zhang Huasun, and who's a leads Ming disciple.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, of course you know that. And who else came by? Xie Pei Chi, Adriano Emperado, Lo Teishu from Taiwan. Because Vince wanted to send those people around to some of the different schools, so we hosted them.
Right.
And of course, Zhang Huasun, at one point in '93 when we went to China, we trained quite a bit with Zhang Huasun. And after that, every time we went, we would train a lot with him. And he spent 2 weeks in New York teaching. So that brought me more and more towards doing Liang style Bagua. And I started to seek out more things with that. At the same time, it introduced us in 1994 to the Gaoi Sheng group in Tianjin.
Right.
And Li Gui Chang's Xingyi group in Shanxi province.
Right, yeah.
So at a certain point, I made the decision, well, the two things I want to pursue are the Liang style Bagua and the Shanxi Xingyi.
Okay.
I started to move away from the Tangshu Dao Xingyi towards the Shanxi methodology of learning.
What drew you that? I mean, I'm a Hebei practitioner. I'm not a Hebei practitioner, obviously, out of Taiwan, which is what you're referring to. But yeah, what did you see there, and what made you make that decision?
I think partially maybe training with Vince Black, where I realized no matter how good I got, I could not cut his line of force. And Vince would cut your line of force like with Bung or with P, like it was nothing. Yeah. And what I saw on Shi was Li Gui Chang's very telling remark that he and Deng Shusheng, his teacher, were small men. And he specifically says not like the big guys from Hebei. Now, it's kind of funny because there are big guys in Shanxi, as you know.
Yeah.
Not only people from Hebei are big.
Right.
But he said we had to be soft on the outside and be hard on the inside.
Okay.
To beat. And it's that embracing the softness with the inner hidden hardness that I realized was the only way. I mean, also in the U.S. I mean, I'm 5'10". I've always been strong for my size, but as you get older, there's plenty of people stronger.
Of course.
And I for 6'4", and they're built like bears. Like I have one student who grew up on a farm. He's got, like, I swear, an extra layer of fascia under his skin.
He might do.
He might. You can't just seize his arms. They're as thick as my upper arm, his forearms.
Wow. Yeah.
So, and I what I saw with the people in Shanxi was they're like, look at how strong you are compared to me. And they, and they have these soft muscles, and then boom, they're on you in a second.
Yeah.
You go to attack, they're not there. The next second, their face is an inch from your face, and you didn't feel how they got from point A to point B.
Mm.
Like with some people, you can replay it in your mind. Oh, I see, they dodged me and they came in. Here, it was like they're there, then they're not there, then they're there, like magic.
Right.
And so that you can do when you're old. That you can do no matter how big somebody is. And I decided to move more in that direction.
You must have met Mao Ming Chun while you were there too.
Yeah, I met Mao Ming Chun. I met most of his disciples because they all came down to. They came down to Beijing to teach the Tang Shidao group originally.
Okay.
So Master Li came with maybe 15 disciples.
Okay. Wow.
Later, I went there as the representative for Tang Shidao. The first visits, there were at least 10 or 12 disciples each time.
Oh, wow.
And each showed different things. And but in the end, I asked Master Li, I was like, because, different disciples correct differently. And it was very confusing. Although they were all trying to help you, I said, like, look, can we just have one guy to show us? And he like, okay, Xingyi Quan, he's the standard, And at that point, I'd never seen Xingyi Quan do anything. He would just sort of take Li around and watch over him. So we didn't even know he really did Xingyi. And then, the next day, training with him, and I'm like, oh my God, this guy's amazing.
Wow.
So he was really one of those classic internal boxer song where it's like, he's not going to show you. You're never going to know he's a boxer unless you cross hands with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all inside.
Yeah, Vince Black is a name that's synonymous with the early generation of definitely North American practitioners of these arts. Yet, it's not as if there's a lot of information about him. I guess mostly because of the time that he was most active, which was pre-internet, let's just say. So, I mean, it's somebody that has done so much, but has, there's not much information in the general, easily accessible way about him. I mean, I just remember when I met my teacher, Di Goyong, and it was actually very interesting because I had shown him Your Tooth from the Tiger's Mouth book. I don't remember what year that was. It was a couple of years after I got it. And your photo was in there. And he's like, oh, Tom. I'm like, what do you mean, oh, Tom? I'm talking to him about this book that I found very useful in my day-to-day bumps and injuries and, things. And he was like, oh, Tom, I know the guy. I'm like, oh. And he said, Tom, Vince. And he always had, very fond memories of both of you. And when I asked him about Vince, nice. he said, yeah, he's really big, really strong, and he can really drink. He can really hold his liquor. I mean, and he repeats that every time Vince's name comes up. But yeah, he's only had fond memories. But, what was Vince's... Yeah, go ahead.
With Di Guo, we had a drinking bout with Di Guo the first night I met, which did not end prettily for any of us, but we'll leave it there.
Yeah, I actually heard about that. I heard some of the details. So, yeah, but
actually, he's not a big guy, right?
Yeah.
We're all these big Americans. He held his own against drinking with us, so I was quite impressed.
He can still drink. Although I'm trying, when he does, when he is like, whenever there's like a gathering, like let's say one of the grand students of one of Li Ziming's disciples, so they're doing a bai shi or they're doing something, and then they go to lunch afterwards. It's always me like trying to get him to not drink as much as he thinks he can drink just because of his age, But when they get together, I know. Yeah, it's no good. So, yeah.
She's a disciple of Xingyi Quan. We like to joke that it's not the training that's hard; it's the drinking and the training.
Yeah.
You go to lunch, drink, and then you have to go back and train, and like.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times Yeah.
But Vince's
So the
yeah, I wanted to,
oh, go ahead.
if I could ask you a little bit about Vince's background. I mean, you knew him intimately. I mean, as you trained with him, you studied under him. I mean, he's the reason why you set out on your path with Xingyi. But I'm trying to get a better picture of the guy in terms of his background, and he seems a bit elusive in that regard. That his name is
I think
everywhere, but there's just not so much that I could find out about him.
I think Vince was never enamored of the internet and people writing about him or about themselves on the internet. So that's why there's not, and he didn't read books. So mostly what the public knows about Vince is stuff they've heard, or his association with Dan Miller when Dan was doing the Bagua Journal, and Vince and him traveled together at some moments in that process. Those are the things where there's things written about Vince, and he's actually interviewed, right. by Dan Miller. But yeah, when I met Vince, he was teaching Xingyi, obviously it was in Yuma at the time, so he was only known locally in that area as a guy who had martial skills, and he'd go to Taiwan frequently. He'd host Shi Hongqi, and I gathered Shi Hongqi would make a circuit. This is before my time with him, right? Would make a circuit through the school, like Mike Patterson's and Jim McNeil, and I forget who all the other guys were. And Vince would go to each. He would actually follow that circuit because Master Shi would only be here, for 8 weeks. So this was your opportunity to grab as much as you could.
Right.
But he had, as I later found out, he'd spent quite a bit of time learning Kajikembo from someone who had trained with Joe Emperado, Adriano Emperado's brother, and maybe also one of Joe Emperado's instructors. So, and very practical. This teacher had actually used this stuff many times, and I think Vince probably did too in his growing up years. But Vince was, I guess he'd had experiences. He started doing Taiji at some point. This is, again, before my time. And he had experience with some Chinese doctor treating his knee. And the guy showed him how to do knee treatments on himself, and then that piqued his interest in learning Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
Also, most of the seniors, well, maybe not most, but a number of Shi Hongqi's senior disciples learned bone setting and Tuina from him, and Shi Hongqi was purportedly amazing at that. And so Vince would set bones and do Tuina. He knew basic herbology, and he continued to study. He studied Liuho Bafa with, oh God, I'm spacing on the guy's name. He'll come to me. He studied Taiji with various people, including Dong Hulin. So I think he had, and then the Xingyi training, which he began with one of the American disciples of Shi Hongqi, and then later he went to Taiwan himself. So that's his martial arts background. Vince was an incredibly smart guy.
Yeah.
Able to see the connections between things in a very deep way. I actually taught him Filipino martial arts.
Oh, wow.
But in the end, it was more like, I was learning things from him about his perception of what was going on in the body mechanics. And that probably changed the way I did Filipino arts, too. He went to the Philippines with me to train with Momoy Cañete, with a group I took. So I got to see what he saw like doing internally as well. It wasn't just my perceptions. So we had a great, he was always my teacher more than, we were friends, we collaborated, but I always viewed him as my teacher.
Yeah.
And a lot of the skills that I got or was able to get later due to him, including the teachers we met in China. But Vince was, in a way, he could be insular too, so he didn't like to put himself out in interviews and things like that.
Right.
And that's why not much about him.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well,
That's kind of
he was very much, Yeah, he was very much focused on himself and his journey as opposed to anything else, and that's what it's all about, I suppose.
And the journey of his immediate students.
Ah,
You
of course.
know? So I think in those years, I went to China between 1993 and 2018, probably 18 or 20 times.
Wow.
A couple times twice. Mostly short stays of 2 to 3 weeks, but intense training every day. And in one of the visits with Vince, we met Wang Shitang, who's also technically a school brother of Li Ziming, but later became a disciple of Li Ziming. And he taught what he said was directly from Guoguomin.
Okay.
So from him, I got his expression of Lao Bajang, which is a little different than the one you usually see Li Ziming's students do,
Yeah.
Bam Mian Zhang, they facing palms, and a bunch, his 64 broadsword form, and we went over the 64 forms, and a lot of the key Bagua maneuvers. I was always, he was older and had a bad leg at that time, but he was a very generous teacher. And what I loved about Wang Shutang was anything you showed him, the least, like I'd show him a broadsword form, somebody else would show me, be like, good, kind of flashy though. And then he'd show you hits, which are all like, bam, stabbed you in the leg, bam, cut your neck. Like, okay. And all of his stuff was like that, just direct, powerful, coming in at these weird angles, which is, kind of the hallmark of Bagua, or one of its hallmarks. And it was great because pairing that with Zhang Sun, who could still do a lot of the moves and was very agile due to his Chinese opera training, I had a really good grasp of, and Zhang was very, very big on the fundamentals and the Jiben Gong.
Yeah.
So I got a good grasp of these different aspects of Bagua from them. And obviously Vince was still teaching the Ang style, so I could get his take, how he interpreted his time with Li Ziming, how he interpreted Wang and Zhang's teachings.
That's
so it was
that's really important. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but you've repeated that a couple of times. These different teachers with their understanding and their interpretations, and that's something that I also think is not so well understood by Westerners for sure, but never mind just Westerners. People in general in martial arts, they don't seem to understand, and it's particularly evident in Bagua, is that it's so much so that it has to become your own art. It's not that everyone is exactly standardized. We get the principles taught to us. We get each teacher teaches his ideas and his perspectives, but even if I look at Li Ziming's differing disciples, they've got different expressions and different aspects that they focus on.
Way different.
Yeah.
And I've learned. I think I learned. Just as passing, my wife reminded me that Vince's Liuho Bafa teacher was York Wai Lu.
Oh.
Anyway, I think what people in Chinese martial arts, there's such this what lineage are you in, as though if you studied with Li Ziming, you only studied with Li Ziming, and I think we forget the influences of our peers on us. Who were the other disciples you train with?
Yeah.
Who were friends of yours in other martial arts that you interact with? And we're a product of all those influences, which is why, as you said, everybody does things differently.
Yeah.
And we're a product of our previous experience.
Yeah.
I really saw Li Ziming's group is a good example because I've trained with Wang Shutang, Zhang Sun, and Zhao Daiyuan.
Yeah.
And they all did things differently, and yet they're also three very different body types. So it's kind of natural.
Yeah, of course.
Zhang was short but thick, and he had that Chinese opera training.
Right.
Wang than me, and these shoulders, like he was the arm wrestling champion in his factory. So he was just like that farmer kind of build, you know. And Jadayon, as you know, he's very thin.
Yes.
So they're not going to do things the same. And Jadayon, you know, when you research his martial arts background, it's enormous.
It is.
He studied different arts. So you can't say that's not going to influence his Bagua. I mean, it's going to. It can't.
Yeah, I was with him last weekend and the weekend before. And you can, you know, his, just if I contrast that to certain aspects, emphasize, and he was just, I mean, it's old students, and this is another thing people just seem to overlook in terms of these arts, is it's old students, and they were going over more details about Lao Bajang, the 8 mother palms, you know, and even the emphasis and the small little nuances that he has are emphasizing different things, that my teacher emphasizes different things, and you know, you could see the core is there. It's the same. It's just, you know, these different teachers with their different experience, background, physicalities, etc. They're going to develop things differently that suit them, and it's important. It really is important.
I think so too, and we shouldn't. You know, the whole point of internal arts is you're not supposed to all look like cookie cutter imitations of each other. Yeah. You're supposed to gain your own expression of it. That's the art of it. So I think, you know, I see what people, a lot of times they're waiting for the transmission, in quotes, from the teacher. Well, there is, I mean, the transmission is happening all the time, but it's what you do with it that it becomes yours. And so if you're waiting for the secret, what my experience is, there is no secret. If the teacher's honest, then he's transmitting the secrets all the time, right? But can you grasp them? Sometimes a teacher could tell you something when you're 2 years in and you're just like, whatever. Yeah. And 5 years later, oh, that thing he said. Oh, now I get it. Yeah. Like, well, because ultimately it doesn't mean anything. You rediscover it. Sorry, you go ahead.
I thought, you know, grasping it, and this is something even I've you know, we're all still constantly on our path. We're constantly learning. We should be, at least. And it's something that I've kind of realized over the years. It's like, grasp, you know, you understand it. Okay, he's taught you this, you've understood it, but now you got to make it your own, and that's really important. And that's where these it's a whole other thing. It's a whole other thing. I was having this discussion with another friend who trains under another teacher, and he was kind of feeling stumped on his training, and he was like, I don't know what to do. He's like, I'm doing these elements, and I keep asking myself why and what for, and I just asked him a few simple questions. I said, "But what are you doing? Are you just doing the 5 elements over and over again? I mean, yes, you're supposed to do the 5 elements over and over again, and at some point you've got to start making those 5 elements yourself. You know, they've got to become your elements. You've got to you can't just do shunbu or a line step pi chuan up and down." And the standard Zhuan Quan and then just the standard animals. You've got to start opening your mind and asking yourself, how about if I do this? Or how about if I go from this to that? What part of P do I want to use in a different stepping? How does it feel? What happens in, you know, and that's just one part of making it your own. It's this kind of experimentation, but also investigation, I would say, you know, about all of these things on yourself. And I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, and you do need peers to explore it with. Yeah. Who are not your teacher.
Yeah.
So that it was one advantage of not living in China and going to the park every day.
Yeah.
Is that I come back and I could just experiment freely without the teacher intervening and going, no, not like that. Which, as teachers, we all have a tendency to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guilty of. Yeah. You know, and with peers who don't do Xingyi or don't do Bagua.
Yeah.
So having friends who are high level in martial arts who, what I call my reality checks, you know, like I have a few friends over the years who are my reality check, because I'll go like, you know, I was thinking you could do, and they'll be like, no, look, I'm going to do this. Like, oh, yeah, you're right. That was brilliant. And I think after, that's really helpful to have, to move around with people like that in a, free way, but also friendly, where you can try stuff without getting your head handed to you, and go like, wow, okay, that really did work. That concept I had, it doesn't work, or maybe it needs rethinking.
Yeah. Well, that's part of it too. You said it right there. You if you're just training, or if you're just thinking and doing the training when you're in front of your teacher, that's only gonna get some aspect done. If you're doing, like my teacher used to say to me, your own training time is really important. Not just training with a teacher or with a group, but training your own training time. In other words, sitting down by yourself and thinking about things and training and feeling without any interference, it's really important. And then, of course, with other people, with your brothers, trying things out with other, like you said, arts or whatever. And then, of course, with your teacher too, who's going to come and polish things for you. So all of that is really important.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess the other thing, my experiences with Gaoji Wu, because were also because his art is kind of got yin. It's mostly Liang style, but there's a whole yin fu branch from his grandfather that pops out in place all over the place.
Yeah, and
his father. He's really interesting because he's one of the few teachers I've talked to who doesn't just say my lineage is from my dad. It is from his dad, but his dad studied with Wang Shangzai. His dad studied with, all these Li Cunyi. His dad studied with not Gogumin.
Yeah, he did study with Gogumin. Yeah,
and his dad was good friends with Li Ming. So you're like, wow, okay, he's not just a product of what he learned from his teachers, or one teacher in the Liang style, Gogumin. He's a product of all these influences, and you see it come out in their expression of it, where they're doing some of the Zhang standing from the Yichuan systems, and exercises. And then you'll see this yin fu element creep in these animal forms, and you'll see some Xingyi creep in their animal forms. Like it's weirdly Xingyi Bagua intermixed together.
It is, yeah.
And then yet their 64 forms are essentially, with a few exceptions, there's a few moves that are different, the same as the ones Li Ming teaches, or Wang Shitang.
Right.
So it's really interesting that you see, here's Gao's father openly is saying, I'm not just a disciple of one guy. He's not a disciple of Wang Shangzai, but he did learn from him. Yeah. And he openly says that and credit. And you see some of their training exercises in their curriculum. So I do think ultimately that's really how Chinese martial arts is.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is.
It's this weird amalgam but people, we read a lineage chart and you think, oh no, he just studied with him, and then that guy studied with him, and it's very misleading.
Yeah, Gao Ziying was also no joke. Gao Ziying was he was a very accomplished person with a lot of ability. He knew what he was doing very well.
That's what I mean when people like Jiayuan say that. I go, okay.
Yeah. For sure.
He spoke very highly about him, and he said they were friends and they exchanged things together. So I've never heard anybody say he didn't know what he was doing.
Oh, he definitely knew exactly what he was doing. Yeah.
I met him. Gao was very generous with me, and it really transformed yet another way to think about Bagua, yet another expression. So I guess I'm a product of all those expressions to some degree, and then my own stuff that got in there. And then more recently a little bit with Jiayuan, but more on Qinna, more studying Qinna with him.
Yeah, he's really refined in his Qinna stuff. I mean, that's something he's put a lot of effort and energy into. And of course, his work had him also, this part of crept over into his actual profession. So quite heavily. And yeah.
Yes. He showed me techniques that he learned from the Stasi, to throw people into the black van or something.
Very useful stuff, like when you're picking your
Well,
kids up from soccer practice.
Funny technique, and because he taught in all those places, so he interacted with huge numbers of people, and he's very impressive. What I also love about Zhao is he's got a great sense of humor,
Oh, totally.
and his students are all. Yeah.
He's always laughing and joking. He's always laughing and joking. I mean, it's hard to not go through a session that you're with him that you're not gonna crack up laughing at something at some point.
Oh yeah. Session, every session we've had with him is like that. So yeah, that's kind of my journey through to the present. Our last trips to China, we trained with Gaoji Wu and Zhao Daiyuan.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Wang Sha, Zhang Huasun aren't with us anymore.
Yeah.
Vince Black isn't with us anymore. So it's. I mean, one teacher that I did spend some time with, Fu Shuyun, who had trained at the famous Nanjing Martial Arts Academy back. And she had learned Xingyi and Bagua there. She was a school sister, I guess, of what's his name, the famous Shuaijiao guy, the Iron Butterfly or whatever. I forget his name. Yeah, she was his school brother. I did study some Xingyi and Bagua with her. We hosted her for a couple of years in New York on a weekly basis, teaching Xingyi Huang Bonyan and her Bagua, which I can't remember who. It was all people who taught at the Nanjing Martial Arts Academy. So we did some Xingyi and Bagua with her, and she was very interesting because here's a woman who's 5'1", maybe 5'1", maybe shorter, but yet like her spirit at age 70 with snow white hair, leaping at your face with monkey. You're like, wow. She had her own interesting expression. I can't say I really teach her method, but all these things are influences.
Perspectives. You get to see different perspectives. It's very good.
Yeah.
So your first trips that you guys came to China, I mean, whose idea was that? Was that Vince's idea? Was it your idea?
Vince had gone to just, he did like a big tour of Shanxi to meet different Xingyi teachers, and he also went around Beijing and maybe Shanghai, and that's when he met Li Zimin. He was gone for 6 months or something. Wow. And then a couple of years later, he organized this trip where we were going to go study. It was kind of a crazy training schedule. In the mornings with Zhang Huasun, in the afternoons with Li Guichang in Beijing. And Li Guichang and his group came down from Shanxi, and he brought guys from Xi'an as well. And then we spent another almost 2 weeks in Tianjin learning with Liao Wanfu in the morning, and with the Gaoi Sheng group under Lu Xinghan and Wang Shusheng in the afternoon.
Wow. So
it was this tremendous, ridiculous amount of material that you're absorbing, but it was like a perspective, and it allowed me to go, well, I did go back and study with Lu Shuhong and his group a little bit, and worked a bit individually with Lu Shuhong, but my heart was more in the Liang style, and I could see you just can't learn two styles of Bagua at the same time.
Right.
You're doing the same moves in a sense, but the structure of learning is different. It just confuses you. So I made a decision to do the Liang style and pursue more learning with Wang Shitang and Zhang Huasun at the time, and later Gaoji Wu. But that introduced that from that time on, I started going almost every year to train.
What was the first year that you guys came through?
First year I went was 93.
Okay.
Vince had been before, and then and that was just Vince and I and one other instructor.
Mm.
That's when we met Young. And that was when I first met Zhang Huasun and trained with him. We also trained briefly in Temple of Heaven Park with, what's his name? Chung style teacher. His
Liu
name will come to
Jingru?
me. No, not him. Wait, I have a... hold on a second.
Sun Jun.
Liu Xinghan.
Oh, Liu Xinghan. Okay. Yeah. He's also gone for quite a while already.
Yeah, he's for quite a while. I can't say I do Liu Xinghan's art because we were running from one teacher to another. Mm-hmm. It was kind of that, in that early years, it was exploring who different teachers were.
Yeah.
And then kind of finding out who you really, for me, figuring out, which two do I really want to train with? And we had also at that time trained with Lianka-chan a bit,
right,
in the park. And then later Vince brought him to the U.S. And he also taught in my school for a few days.
Nice.
So experience his Xingyi a bit.
Yeah. I don't know. But
I can't say.
I don't know if you, when you were here, or if you had a chance to interact with some of the other Cheng people here in Beijing, like Liu Jingru. Sun Jun is gone now, a few years already. Liu Xinghan, you already mentioned. I don't know if you've ever had any interaction with the others.
No, I've heard of them, of course, and I met some of them, but not. I don't know how do you say his name? Liu Xingru.
Liu Jingru, yeah, Liu Jingru.
Never met him. I've met a lot of people who studied with him or know him, but I never met him in person.
It's interesting because what you'll notice is, even though they're all concurrently alive, or they were, some are gone now, but they were all concurrently alive, so they were in general roughly the same generation, give or take a decade or less, and they were all Cheng stylists, very close to, in one way or the other, to Cheng Tinghua, one way or the other, yet they were also different. I mean, it's very interesting to see.
Yeah, it's what always amazed me about Bagua. It's like how little we actually know of what people like Cheng Tinghua and Yin Fu taught, or Liang Fu also, like what they actually taught. We have no real conception.
Sure.
I mean, and it's not a very old art in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I've always, so at a certain point, researching all of that's interesting, but you just hear the same stories over and over, and there's no fact information about it.
Yeah.
I mean, even the rooster knives, Jadayon was saying, nobody actually knew what this special weapon Deng Haichuan had looked like. There were written descriptions of it and written descriptions of moves, and so they think it looked like this rooster claw knife.
Yeah.
Right? But that's why you see variations on the rooster claw knife in different styles, and other people say, no, it's like the Mandarin duck knife. It looked like that. It didn't look like, and there's like, wow, it's not even that old, and nobody even knows what weapon he used.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
have you learned the rooster claws from the Liang family?
I learned it from Wang Shitang, yeah, and I learned the wind fire wheels from him,
right,
as well. And then I learned the Mandarin duck knife, or at least that's what Gaoji Wu calls it, from Gao. And Wang also did the hook sickle swords. He used the same form as the rooster knife. He would just adapt the moves to the hook sickle swords, which kind of look like tomahawks.
Yeah, I've seen this.
Yeah, whereas some people like Gaoji Wu have a separate form for that.
Right.
But I never learned his. I just learned his Mandarin duck knife, which I really like that design of the knife, where it's like a straight. You have like a knife sticking out of your thumb side, a knife straight out of your pinky side, and then you have the crescent moon. It's a very elegant weapon.
Yeah, I've seen that too. It kind of looks like I don't know if you've seen those Tibetan Buddhism, like Vajra,
Yeah.
but with a sickle, like
that.
with a crescent on the front of that. Yeah, it's basically similar to that.
Whereas like in the Gaoi Sheng style, they have more the classic sun moon, or what people call the deer horn or the sun moon knives,
Yeah,
right, where they're curved.
yeah,
Yeah, and Gao's great. And coming out of Filipino martial arts, I kind of like that straight blade.
really? Okay.
It just seems easier to use, more functional. There's no blade pointing at you. It's always all pointing out at the other guy. I
Yeah.
like that.
I mean, I don't know if you in your Filipino martial arts. I know in Indonesia they use karambits, but I don't know if do they have karambits in
Uh,
Filipino martial arts?
no, a lot of Filipino martial artists have adopted the karambit
Yeah.
as one of their weapons, but to my knowledge, it's not a traditional Filipino weapon.
Okay.
If anything can be said, really traditional in that sense. But but specifically, in Cebu, where Momoy was, that was the first place the Spanish landed. So there was a lot of you see the old books on a screen, a lot like Spanish fencing with dagger, but of course you're using different weapons, so it's altered. They use a longer, straighter blade. It's almost more like a Western blade,
Okay.
traditionally. But you see all kinds of blades in the Philippines, and each teacher has their thing that they like or don't like. So
Right.
and they have weird weapons too, like the Chinese, like weird multi-edged things. Or so
Things that look like they could injure the user just as much as they could injure the opponent.
sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the rooster knife's interesting, so I did learn that.
Yeah, they're very interesting weapons. I mean, the Liang style rooster, those rooster claw, blades that pair. I mean, you can imagine if you had to sharpen that whole thing, and you became proficient with it. It's a really nasty weapon. It really is a nasty weapon.
As a friend of mine, when he brought them home to show his wife, she's like, "Really? You need a form to fight with that?"
You need a form. That's true. Yeah, yeah. I learned that a few years ago, and of course, we call the other pairs that you were saying that some people call the deer. We call them the Mandarin duck. Yuan Yang.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Taiji Wu.
yeah. Which is interesting also to see the name differences.
In the U.S. duck knife, nobody knows what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean it's very interesting that they should. I mean, culturally, if they understood the animal culturally and where the naming came from, it's not that it's shaped like a duck per se. It's that they're in pairs. Like Mandarin ducks are always the same pair. They're like a couple. The male and the female are paired for life.
So it's just really saying it's a paired weapon.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, interesting. Yeah. And your school in the USA, is it still running? I mean, I know your website is still up and functional, but
It's prohibitively expensive in New York anymore in Manhattan to run a martial arts school. I mean, so I teach a lot in seminar format before COVID, and actually, to be frank, most of I teach most of the seminars. I teach are in Chinese medicine, bone setting, which is not taught in acupuncture schools, and like an organ manipulation according to Chinese medicine. That's not taught in, and then I teach acupuncture and some other classes outside of the acupuncture schools usually.
Okay.
And then I teach them in Xingyi and Bagua. Sometimes we've run like 2-year programs, or we've run a series on for our advanced students on, because I have enough instructors now that I don't feel I need to start a beginner class.
Okay, makes sense.
Americans aren't too up with the just show up in the park at 6 a.m. and I'll show you something kind of thing that happens in China.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially in the winter, the class drops precipitously because I've tried that teaching year round in the park. And, mostly it's your advanced students who come. So we'll do like we're going to teach Wang Shitong's broadsword,
Okay.
64 broadsword. It'll be a 3-weekend series. Or we're going to teach the Mandarin Duck Notch and Gaoji Wu as a way to get more efficiently teach a group of advanced students all at once the form, right?
Yeah.
Or like we do a retreat. We were doing it every 2 years, so we're due to do one this July if things change. A week-long retreat where people come from all over at all levels of ability, Xingyi and Bagua, and we train 10 hours a day.
That's great.
Staying over to college. And so I'm doing more things like that.
Okay.
And then visiting visiting satellite groups who are teachers who are teaching. Like we have one student in Portland who's one instructor in Portland, so he's invited me to his school a couple times to teach Bagua to his students.
Would you say Bagua is more popular in the USA than Xingyi?
I'd say, yeah. I think Xingyi's hard for people. I've had people who say they want to do Xingyi, and then the reality is, once they start standing in Santi, they go like, forget it. I think Bagua is more fun in the beginning because there's more moves, kind of, and there's more movement, right, than in Xingyi. Xingyi is difficult to understand in the beginning.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. How do you teach your Bagua curriculum? I mean, do you start with Dingshi Bajang, the 8 fixed palms?
Yeah, I think Dingshi Bagua Zhang is the most important thing. Yeah. You really believe to quote that it's all in the walking. Walking is the superior technique to everything else. Dingshi is the way to get that. And so Jiben Gong exercises and Dingshi are, for me, the base. And they require a tremendous amount of time to master them if you really want to be good at Bagua, because those two things appear in every form from Lao Bajang to the most quote-unquote advanced form.
Very true.
Right?
And American students have no problems doing Dingshi Bajang, but they don't like doing Santi Shi?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generalizing because there are students who prefer Santi Shi. But yeah, I think it's because you're moving.
Yeah, I suppose.
It's easier. Even though you're holding the body fixed in one way, you're not still, right? You have something to do. My understanding of Santi Shi is it's all about just relaxing and sensing inside. And you're basically talking about Taoist meditation at that point. And that's hard for people. It's easier, you could also say Dingshi Bagua Zhang is meditation because it kind of is.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're moving gives you something to do, so the mind has a focal point instead of the mind freaking out.
The monkey brain is running wild, saying, why the hell am I just standing still? I need to do something.
And my shoulder's killing me.
Yeah. It's very interesting that, for me, because my core was Xingyi first, and I actually, that was the art that I really wanted to learn. But of course, my teacher told me what he wanted me to do, so I was wanting to follow his path that he followed. So he did Xingyi mostly, and then he met Li Ziming and did Bagua. His teacher Zhao Zhong that he did Xingyi with was his first teacher. Of course, not as a child. He didn't teach him Xingyi as a child, but when he got older, he taught him Xingyi. And I wanted to follow that same path. And maybe it was because I was just used to doing the Santi Shi and the other Zhanzhuang methods that we do in Xingyi training, including the moving versions of our Zhanzhuang, which are on the spot. You don't move in terms of stepping, but you move your body in certain ways. But when I started doing Dingshi Bajang in Bagua, it's extremely hard. I think people just misunderstand, or I don't know. They think to do it correctly. It's so hard. I mean, I end up saturated even now after these years, all these years of doing it. I still get wet. I get soaked through when I do. Okay, I do an excessive amount, so I'll do 128 circles of Ding Shi Ba Zhang before I do anything else. But I get soaked on that. I mean, it's a lot. It's a very, I don't know. It's
your whole body like a rope, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so you're engaged all the fascia in the body, including the ones that pull on the internal organs, while you're pulling open meridians, and it's a profound exercise. It's an intense exercise, but it also is, you can see when students can't manifest things, it's usually, in my opinion, they haven't done enough of that.
Yeah, that's true.
They've cheated, and I know because I did it wrong for a long time. And when Zhang Huasun corrected me, I was like, oh, crap. I got to spend a year back, right? And so I try and tell people, look, you could be like me, and, you do it for 2 years, and now you got to start over. Or you could do it right from the beginning. And very few people want to start over if they've done it wrong. Yeah. I wanted it so bad, I was willing to do it, but a lot of people don't want it that bad, or they're just, it's a different personality, but I had to do that. Even with Xingyi, when I learned Shanxi Xingyi, their basic approach is different. So it was, in a way, it was like starting Xingyi over, and here I'm already teaching Xingyi, and it's really that investing loss. Like, okay, I got to forget all that stuff I think I know and do it this way. And then you realize once you change the internal body, the stuff you learned before isn't a waste. Like the skills, the applications all come back, but maybe done in a different way now.
Yeah.
But I really think what people don't get is in internal arts, what you're really trying to do is transform the internal body. And if you don't do that, no matter how many forms and techniques you learn, you're not doing Xingyi and you're not doing Bagua.
Very true. I mean, it changes everything. After years, it changes the way you do everything anyway. The way you move, the way you walk, the way you sit, the way you think. It changes everything.
For me, it changed my Chinese medicine, the way I think about the Chinese medicine. I think it makes it much easier to do bone setting if you do Xingyi or Bagua, because you're basically taking the joints through those ranges of motion that you use in those arts. So you intimately know already, in your body what the correct angles of the joints should be. And then when you encounter someone whose elbow's out of line, it's very easy to go, oh, it's supposed to do this and it doesn't do that. Oh, okay, I want it to do that. Great. Now I know what angle to set it at. Right?
That's very interesting.
Internal arts, intuitively. But when I teach to people who don't do internal arts, you've got to do all this explanation. You see it's out at this angle and blah, blah, and you have to explain all this anatomy. But actually, that's not how I do it.
Okay.
Like, that's not how I learn, right? It's funny because Jiaoyuan's one of the people, you have this statement to really understand martial arts, to know Chinese medicine, which I've encountered several times in China, Jiaoyuan being one of them. And yet I find it funny that most people don't actually know Chinese medicine.
Well, that's true.
Right? Who do internal. But for me, the interweaving between traditional Chinese medicine and traditional Chinese martial arts, each helps the other big time. It's really, you don't have to be a master acupuncturist, but having some base knowledge of Chinese medicine is really helpful.
Well, what you just said is some words that my teacher said to me directly, and almost exactly in those words. He said, well, you don't have to become a Chinese doctor, but it's going to help your martial arts to understand some basic understanding of Chinese medicine and Chinese physiology.
And then sometimes goes over like a lead balloon in the U.S.
But there's this, there's this strange understanding, or I don't know, aversion to Chinese medicine as like it's some sort of quackery.
Well, there's that. but it's also that, hey, I just want to learn how to fight. I don't want to learn about Chinese medicine, and I want to learn, Taoist philosophy, this kind of American, we'll just take the good stuff and forget all that cultural crap. And what people don't realize is you can't get the good stuff without understanding the culture it comes from, or you're missing at least 30%, It's not just some body mechanics that the Chinese figured out. It's built into, it's tied to a bunch of other things in Chinese culture. And you don't have to speak Chinese, you don't have to move to China, but you do have to engage with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to engage with a little bit of Chinese words and expressions, and, certainly I don't speak Chinese, so it certainly would help if I did.
But
I've been lucky.
You've got an understanding of the meaning in English, at least, and the culture and the history, etc.
Well, I've been lucky that, early on I met Huang Guoji from Shanghai,
Right.
who was the Shanghai Medical College, and he's accompanied me on every trip to China. And Huang is such an upright guy that all the teachers love him. And I kind of think some taught me because they're like, well, if he's with this guy Huang, who seems like such a gentleman, maybe he's okay. And but it's been great because Huang he's a linguist, and like I can go like, wait, that word, like, and he'll go, okay, here's the meanings, and there's a story about that character, and it references this other thing, and and so I've been deep into some things without really speaking the language because of Huang. And doing translation with him where we're sitting going over characters, and I'm like, well, Huang, the way you translate this, it's not in English, that doesn't make sense. I'm like, so then we have to dissect the character, and he'll be like, no, this character means this, and then we'll come to some, okay, so in English we got to say it this way, and that's been super helpful. And it's sort of what you said earlier, not just the it's your own personal training, but it's also just thinking about it. It's not always like you have to get a circle. You have to think about all the things you do in a very deep way to make progress. Well, it's not, and I think in America, maybe it's not just America, maybe it's the internet age, it's monkey see, monkey do. I do the app on my phone every day and I should get it. Well, with internal arts, that's not going to happen.
I think that there's a whole other side to it. And I mean, even my wife was a martial artist, and she understands the background of martial arts. I mean, she's done it most of her life. Even she calls me Wuchi, which means a crazy martial arts person, And I think that's the only way that you can really delve deep into these things, if it's obsessive. There's no other way I can put it. I mean, you could have bad addictions, and you could have... I know that some people want to say that, all addictions are bad, but I think the only way that you're going to get really deep into these arts is if you're almost obsessive in an addictive way, an addicted way to these arts. And that's the other side of things. Like, Westerners are so used to going into a martial arts school and training 2 or 3 days a week for an hour or 2 hours, and that's the period of time that they actually think about that martial art. And for the rest of the time outside of that class, or outside of that school, they're not actually thinking about it. And that's where what you just mentioned, it's got to be something that's even outside of training. It has to be, you have to be investigating it. You have to be thinking about it. It doesn't mean you have to be reading about it, but it's got to be something on your mind all the time.
Yeah, or even if it's under the surface of your thoughts, it's there.
Yeah.
Right? When you walk down the street in New York, you're feeling, okay, I'm not mud stepping down the street, but I'm feeling how the principles of mud stepping are helping me get out of the way in a crowd,
right.
That kind of thing.
Well, I've done Santi on the subway before, but without the hands. People look at me like I'm crazy, but I really don't care. It's a very interesting feeling.
Yeah, we do that. We do that too. It's like you can't help yourself. If I'm waiting in a line, I have to really be careful not to start walking a circle or doing some Xingyi thing.
Yeah.
So you're kind of inside without, trying to manifest it outside.
Mm.
It's fun.
So you studied Chinese medicine. I mean, you said that you started studying under. No, you what got you into it? You
With
okay,
Vince Black.
right, okay.
Yeah, and because of him, I got interested in it. I started with the bone setting and
Mm.
Tuina that he taught. When I met him, he was actually on his way to start acupuncture school because he wanted to be official. Like he was treating people unofficially.
Okay.
And inspired me to also go to acupuncture school, apprentice with an herbalist for a while, study with different, once you go to acupuncture school, it's a whole other world. You have to upkeep your license. You're always taking courses.
Mm.
You're always advancing your skills. So now you got two things. You got your Xingyi Bagua, and you've got this thing that's just like them, where people in that realm, Chinese doctors are obsessing and, all the time about Chinese medicine. And, for fun, they're reading herb formula books. That's like light reading. So that becomes another part. But I think that's, it was pretty intensive study to do the acupuncture license and the herbal training. So that interwove in some way with my martial arts training because those were my two main focuses. And I always liked treating injuries, partly, I think, because of the martial arts training, because that was the first medicine I learned. And I started to see how it's so interwoven with the Xingyi Bagua.
Yeah.
And so everything I do really in medicine flows from that Xingyi Bagua internal connection idea, as opposed to coming at it more the other way through the mind.
Right.
Coming at it internal sensing, which has its positives and negatives. I should have memorized more herb formulas than I have. So I always have to look some up that other, Chinese doctors can just recite like,
Yeah.
It says fine Husband's Classic that this herb and only this herb has these functions. I can't do that.
Yeah.
Because I think partly I don't speak Chinese or read it, but I came at it from this other direction of internal sensing to understand the medicine as opposed to the memorization route.
Right. Not parroting, but actually feeling, living, and breathing it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think these guys also feel, live, and breathe it, but they got there a different way.
Okay.
They started by parroting, and then it becomes part of them. So I don't know what that internal process is like because I didn't do it that way.
Sure.
But I do read these books where Chinese doctors, just the stuff they have memorized is so vast.
Yeah.
Because that was the traditional way of learning back in the day.
Well, yeah, especially with a largely illiterate society. I mean, I've said this probably before in another podcast, but my teacher's Xingyi master, Zhang, was illiterate. He was illiterate.
Yeah.
But he would rattle off everything within his curriculum by heart. Like, everything he had learned by heart.
I've seen a few elderly Chinese Bagua practitioners who could rattle off the 36 songs.
Yeah, my teacher can do that. My teacher can do that.
Yeah. I always aspired to do it, but, first of all, it doesn't rhyme in English.
No.
It's very wordy in English, but still, it's still impressive. We weren't trained like that.
Yeah, it's a different, but that's necessity, right? I mean, that was just the only thing the only way that they could learn was like that. It's like us. I mean, I recall when I was younger, before the advent of mobile phones being so common and whatever, if you made an appointment, you wrote it down, or if you didn't, for the most case, you remembered it. Telephone numbers, you memorized them. And that was just normal. Nowadays, if you had to say to somebody, memorize your top 30 phone numbers that you use regularly, it's like, what? I can't do that. But actually, it's not that bad. When you have to do it, you find a way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because we can just look it up. We can look it up on our phone, the 36 songs.
Yeah, exactly. Do you still treat? I mean, is your clinic still running?
Oh, I closed it a few years ago. we looked for new space, and then I realized, I got a lot of teaching things and writing things going on. Maybe I'll just try that for a year, take a sabbatical. Well, my sabbatical's now 5 years long, so I guess I'm teaching martial arts and teaching Chinese medicine is what I'm doing now.
Right.
And writing books, stuff online, and
how
doing a lot of
sorry, go ahead.
courses now, because we've started to ramp up the online learning program.
Yeah.
So far, more Qigong and Taoist meditation, Daoyin, Taoist yoga. We do have an online learning program in Bagua, Zhang, which is a way to get people in, and then they can. We've had a few people actually go into foundational instructor training from that program, and do quite well. They teach, right? So at a certain point, they come and do in-person training, intensive in-person training. It's worked out pretty well for the right person who can navigate the program. It works.
Well, that's great.
So I'm planning on doing more in the, especially with the COVID thing where people are stuck at home.
Yeah.
People want Qigong, health things, so I'm trying to do more of those. Although we have a cane self-defense class with the Neja cane coming up in January.
That's very practical. I mean, for today's day and age as well, it's something you can walk around with. Unlike my Xingyi spear,
exactly.
Which when I do try to walk around with it, people run. I don't know why, but...
Yes, spears. Unless you're dressed in like a Shakespearean play, forget it.
But I wanted to ask you something about when you were treating... When your clinic was running, how well received and how open are American people to Chinese medicine for treatment?
Well, I didn't advertise, so people came because I fixed somebody they knew. So that's so in the beginning, but I will say in the beginning when I first started treating 25 years ago, 90% of the people had never had acupuncture before. By the time I closed my clinic, I would say half the people who came to you had acupuncture before.
Okay.
So that's a sea change over a 25-year period. But and my clinic was a bit of an anomaly. I was known, and still am, I guess, as the guy who can fix orthopedic injuries. So people would get referred to me from all over the place. So they came, for the most part, with a positive attitude about it. But and later it means, though, also you're talking about people where you're their last resort. So they're pretty hopeful and open to it. They're not open always to doing what you ask them to do. Okay. Which is, part of a lot of these medicine is how you live your life, as you know, right? It's that kind of middle path, as my friend likes to say. It's like baby bear's porridge, right? It's not too hot, it's not too cold.
Yeah.
It's hard, right? And Westerners, maybe Chinese people have trouble with this too. I don't actually know. Westerners have a real problem with that, right? It's much easier to be a vegetarian or to be some extreme, I'm just going to have no... than it is to be moderate. Being moderate is not easy.
I've found that very interesting, watching how quick Westerners bounce from extreme to extreme.
Yeah, and so the advice you're giving people with diet, with exercise, is this baby bear's porridge advice, which is very, to keep the analogy of porridge, unpalatable to what they're here to most of your patients, because what they're being told on the internet, what their friends are telling them is, there's a new diet, you should do that. I felt so much better after I did. I've been doing Pilates, or I've been doing whatever crazy exercise thing, and you'll feel better if you do that. So people get bounced from one fad to another very easily nowadays. And it's very hard to give that sage-like Chinese advice and have people follow it. That would be the frustrating part. But I think they were open to the bone setting, to the cupping, to the acupuncture, these things that you would think would seem very cool. For the most part, that's changed a lot. People are Chinese herbs.
Not so much.
Not so much. I make my patients take the raw herbs, but a lot of practitioners use granulated herbs or pills because it's easier to get compliance. But they don't work as well, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've got a friend was living in China for a very long time, and he's just moved out back to the West, and recently he had this, well, he'd been having it before. He'd been having these like cluster headache things going on, and some, serious discomfort, like headaches that would just put him man down for days, and he went to just a normal physician there who charged him an arm and a leg and did an x-ray and did a this and did a that, and basically same thing in the end. He still got the headaches. And he went, and this is what people don't understand is like, give it a try, because you'll never know, if there is a treatment that is just gonna, you'll be surprised that they've got things that you think are untreatable or not treatable in a efficient way that are actually treatable or manageable through Chinese medicine. And he went to, a Chinese physician over there, got some needles, a quarter of the price of what he was paying for the other stuff, and he's fine. He's not 100% yet, but he's much better, and I have the same thing with me. I mean, I've just always gone to Chinese doctors. Even before I lived in China, I went to a Chinese high school. So when I had normal injuries and things like that, I would first go to a Chinese doctor, and so I've had acupuncture my whole life, and I've always and herbs and moxa and all the other stuff that goes with it. But that's always been step one for me in terms of treatment, always.
Right, but that's really unusual.
Yeah, I suppose it is.
Did you grow up?
Well, I was mostly in South Africa, but I went to a school that was a Chinese high school. So basically, it was a Chinese primary and high school. It was everything from your first year to the end of high school. It was everything was there, but that was where I went. So
I mean, I know, and it was similar to your story, but for most part, most of us don't grow up with it, so it's a foreign thing at first.
Yeah.
And we could go on about the state of Western medicine and China. It's like a big subject unto itself. And I could go into my diatribe, but I'll refrain.
Yeah.
But I'm with you on it. To me, it's the first stop, and particularly with orthopedic injuries. Traditionally, Chinese people, in modern times, I still encounter Chinese people go, if you break a bone, you never go to the Western. You go to the bone center. You never go to the because they're going to do crap. And that when in my early days in Chinese medicine, almost every Chinese person I encountered, even if they took antibiotics and went to the doctor for everything else, they would say that.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very telling.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
Because Western doctors don't set bones anymore; they do it surgically.
Yeah.
And that has its own. It's good and it's bad at the same time. I mean, it has its positives, but it can have a lot of negatives. So it's an interesting thing in the bone setting world. And I'm a little bit of an anomaly because bone setting is one of those gray areas in our profession. So none of the schools want to touch it, or most of the schools don't. Although it's because you're stepping on the toes of chiropractors and osteopaths a little bit.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a legal thing, and some states have started to say if you do Chinese medicine, then bone setting is part of your practice, part of your scope of practice, and some states do not have that. New York, it's gray area. New Jersey, it's not a gray area.
So what do you mean? They'd make you fall under chiropractic, or you'd have to get some sort of other licensing, or what does that mean?
If it's taught in your school and the state says your scope of practice includes acupuncture, herbs, and massage and Zhang techniques, then it's legal. But in most states, Tuina is considered part of your scope of practice, but not Zhang techniques.
Oh, okay.
So there are states where and then if it's part of your scope of practice, then it is legal.
I see.
But this turf carving, chiropractors have their turf, osteopaths have their turf. Acupuncturists are up in arms about physical therapists doing dry needling trigger points, so because that's basically stepping on our turf.
I see.
Kind of nonsense. So.
I remember my teacher when he went to visit his daughter in Australia, and he came back and he said to me that he found out that he met a couple of local acupuncturists, and they were Australians, and he asked his daughter to ask them where did they study, and they said no, they did a local course, and they were sticking needles in people, and he said. He asked, you did a course, and he comes back to me with this, he's reciting this story with this shocked look on his face. He's like, these people are sticking needles in people, and they've got like 6 months of training. For him, it's like totally out of the ordinary, because you know what it's like here before you can start.
Yeah. Oh, and I actually taught a emergency needling course to a bunch of martial arts guys. One of whom, wife was in acupuncture school, and she got mad at him. She's like, wow, I'm paying all this money, and Bisio just teaches you in a weekend like how to needle people. And I said to him, yeah, I mean, the reality is it's not difficult to do basic needling. You could teach a kid to do it. To be a skillful acupuncturist who can treat many conditions,
that's a different story.
Requires a lot of training.
Yeah.
To learn how to do emergency knee treatment, it's not, I teach patients how to needle their own knees. I mean, once they do it 100 times, they can needle somebody else's knee. I mean, and they probably do a good job. It's not that hard. It's funny.
Yeah.
I'm not big on all the stuff. To my mind, if you're good, you're good. If you're not, you're not. And that's that. Who cares about your license? Plenty of licensed people who are no good. Plenty of unlicensed people who are fantastic at fixing stuff. So,
well, that is how medicine used to be, I suppose. It was the guy in the village who could treat the best. That's who you went to.
Yeah.
So,
and in tradition, you apprentice, just like in the legal profession here. It used to be you apprenticed with a lawyer, and then eventually you became a lawyer, right? There wasn't bar exams that you passed, and it was the same. In China, you apprentice with different doctors, and then you started treating people at a certain point.
Yeah. That's a
which doesn't always.
Yeah, that's something my teacher's also he's always said, give yourself massage, and he's always doing that.
Yeah.
When he's sitting there watching TV at the end of the day, he's always rubbing something, whether it's his knee or his foot or scratching, you obviously know that kind of like brushing your scalp with your nails, or pulling on your ears, or
just did a whole course on it, and all the older martial arts generation I've met, in the morning they get up and sit up in the bed and they do the rubbing.
Yeah, exactly.
Meridians, get the brain activated. I've done it for years. I've taught it to people, and for some people it's life-changing to do those practices because you're basically normalizing and regulating the chi dynamic all the time then.
Yeah.
And if you also do martial arts, of course, then you're regulating the chi dynamic in the body all the time, and you're obviously exercising the fascia and the meridians. Yeah, so I think it's super important to knowing Chinese medicine, and if you do martial arts, but even just for health, for just knowing a little bit can really make a big difference for people.
Did you have any overlap between people that had come to you for some sort of injury that you had helped them with, whether it be chronic injury from lifestyle or sudden injury from an accident, but that had then gone through your treatment? You'd have given them some physical rehabilitation exercises to do on their own, and then from that they had gotten into training martial arts with you or doing Xingyi or Bagua?
Yeah, I've actually had a number of people like that. One of my top instructors, he originally did Wing Chun and came to me with a wrist injury, and I set his wrist. It was like one treatment, and he'd been to all these doctors. I mean, it was just out of place, so nobody was it's not like I'm some genius. It's like your wrist is out of place. Nobody treated, put the bones back. And then he's like, I want to study Xingyi, and I was like, oh, okay. So that's actually, I've gotten a lot of my students have come from that place in the earlier years. Or in a few cases, wow, these Qigong exercises you showed me are great. How can I go farther? Oh, you want to do martial arts. Okay. So like 5-element Qigong, which is the first one I learned from Vince Black, it's the way I've seen other people do it. And when I look at the way I do it, and I've actually, some people in France that I taught to have commented on this, they're like, yeah, yours is so Xingyi. So it's a set that a number of people teach, but the way I learned it, it's very much present, the Xingyi in it. So for some people, they learned that and they went on to do Xingyi then.
Okay.
Because it's just a natural flip to it,
And obviously they found benefit in their life in general from before and after.
Oh yeah, like I used to teach it to, I treated a lot of jazz musicians at one time for whatever, it just happened to happen. But, jazz musicians like to practice stuff. They're very disciplined. They practice like 6 hours a day. So you give them something to practice, they'll actually do it. And I found, a great way to overcome the imbalance in playing a bass or a guitar is Qigong, right? As a balancing exercise. And some of them went on to use it in their teachings at universities, where they teach their students some Qigong as part of their training in how to play the bass or whatever.
Wow.
Because they see that it a lot of the problems people get in playing those instruments is that it causes these muscular imbalances in the body.
Yeah.
So I think it's super helpful. I've taught the Tiangan exercises, which I include in our Liang style, even though they're technically from the Gaoi Sheng style. Yeah. I include them. I sometimes teach them to people who play golf or tennis because, those one-sided torsion sports.
Yes.
With golf, you only one direction, and so people get all these back problems from it. And I found the Tiangan exercises, this torsional kind of twisting stuff that has all the movements in Bagua in it, but it's a discrete set of, you can make it 10 exercises or 12. Really helpful for people like that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much overlap and so much ability that, the physical maintenance, improvement, and health benefit from these exercises that are included in the entire sphere of these practices. And that's what we were saying a bit earlier, that people are like, yeah, but how do I use this and how do I fight with that? And if it doesn't have any effect for that, why am I practicing it? Well, the overall, the holistic benefit that these things give, which apply to your martial arts and apply to your life in general, they're there. So if you're just cutting them out, you're missing and you're losing on a whole lot of things. And I've actually seen in more recent years even combat athletes, and I laughed when I saw this. I don't remember who said it, but he was a professional combat athlete who had this statement because he had released some instructional set on stretching, and he was like, stretching helps me with my combat career because it keeps me injury free and I recover from my workouts better. And he's got this whole stretching there. Oh, congratulations, next you're going to be doing some form of breathing with that, and then you're going to become a Chinese martial artist. Well done. You've come back to square one.
I think for some people that's their path to get there. We all have a different path. But I'm with you. If you look beyond the 5 elements, it's like, P is splitting people with an axe, and you really look at all the meanings of P and of the metal element, like that alone is very enriching, right? Outside of the concept, and how the 5 elements interplay in your body. Actually, there's an interesting statement that Shaoji Wu, who's one of Xingyi Quan's
students,
earlier students, in his 10 points on Xingyi, he says the organs are the gates, and I was always like, what does he mean by that? And then after training for a long time, I realized, no, he's not joking around. The organs start to move when you practice, and when they open up, the gate opens for the internal force and power and ability. And, I think these pithy statements were like, oh, they're being poetic, And then I realized, no, these guys were down and dirty fighters. They're not being poetic.
Yeah.
They're being literal. Organs are the gates.
Yeah.
And so if you really understand that in Xingyi, then your practice of Pichuan is like, it's each time you do it, each movement is so impregnated with every little aspect of the movement has these spirals and these twists and these internal sensations. It's like a micro universe, just the one element, let alone all five. Yeah. And that's what I guess keeps people like you and I addicted or fascinated. I like fascinated better than addicted.
Obsessed. Yeah. Fascinated is a better way to explain it, even if my family calls it an addiction. But there's an interesting story about somebody that started doing circle walking with he started practicing Bagua. It was a person, this was years ago, who had been pretty ill, physically some illness, not too sure what, but at a pretty early age, his hair had turned gray, and he started doing circle walking, and he just did Zhang, the downward pressing palms, the first palm of Ding Shi Ba Zhang. And he just did that for a year, and he was doing it every day. And after about a year and a bit, he was healthy, and his hair became black again. And I know if somebody had relayed the story to me, I would have told them they're smoking something. But if I hadn't seen it for myself, I wouldn't have believed it. But it really did have an effect on whatever was wrong with his general system. So.
Well, it makes sense, too, that palm in particular, right? Because Jiao says that palm connects heart fire and kidney water and opens the Ren and Du channel, right? So you're activating the microcosmic orbit, which activates the brain and circulates energy up to Bai Hui and
the crown.
And yin and yang by balancing water and fire, heart and kidneys. So it's like, especially if you intensely focused on it, I could see that almost be maybe more powerful for health than doing all 8, with less intensity. So it's a great story.
Yeah.
Go do a lot of downward pressing.
So anybody out there with a gray hairline,
Half joking.
Look up a Bagua teacher near you. Yeah. No. Well, it's been very interesting hearing your recollection. Sorry, I cut you off there again. You wanted to say something?
No, else you wanted to talk about, because we're going on 2 hours here now.
I mean, we could do this again, but it was very interesting to hear your background and your thoughts, your experiences both in Chinese martial arts, which is extensive, other martial arts, your history with these fascinating characters that are some are with us now still, some are gone, and just your effect on the field as a whole with both your writings and your teachings. So I mean, I thought, it's good to hear that you're still handing this down in some form or another. I know that it's a different situation in New York, particularly to run a full-time school. I'm sure it's heavily expensive, but it's good that you're still carrying on in other avenues, focusing on instructors and other seminars and still putting it out there. So, yeah.
Well, and it's great to see what you're doing in Beijing, keeping the tradition alive with these teachers. And if you would pass on my regards to Jia Daiyuan and Go Yang.
I will do.
Them.
Thank you so much.
That would be great.
And I'll get your.
Oh, thank you.
I'll get your any relevant contact details, etc., that you want to put in the show notes. I'll just, for the listeners listening, they are in the show notes, so I'll get them from you. And if there's any other last things you wanted to say or mention, go ahead.
I think we've covered here. I mean, So I think it's been very pleasurable chatting with you, and I know you were going to come through New York a couple of years ago, so I hope if in the future that happens again and there's no COVID, we can actually meet in person.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Definitely. Let's see what the new year brings. I hope it doesn't bring any other new surprises like this year brought the world, but hopefully things get back to normal.
Yeah, so the only contact thing for me, the best way is the Internal Arts International internalartsinternational.com website. People can contact me through that, or they can find out about anything I'm doing there.
Okay, and I'll put some links to some of your books as well in the show notes that people can go check out.
Great, it's been a pleasure.
Oh, pleasure's all mine.
I'll let you late on your end, so I'll let you go.
All right. Well, thank you once again for being my guest today. I really enjoyed it, and we'll keep in touch.
Okay, great.
Right.
Look forward to it, Byron. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.